it's Dr. Jan. And so now you have your job. You've screened for workplace bullying, and even if you think there were signs of toxicity and bullying, you decided to take the job. And that's great. Congratulations. Give yourself a hand. So, what do you do when you get that job, especially if you think there's toxicity? What we're going to talk about today is, I think, really good advice, whether you're going into a job where you suspect there's toxicity or you're just taking a new job and you don't know anything about the culture in the organization. The first thing to remember is that you have to prepare for your job. And that means really to develop your professional skills to what you think the organization is going to need. Now, you know that I'm a huge fan of having organizations talk about what professional skills they need and then training their workers to have those skills. Again, you also know that I have never worked in an organization or ever even heard of an organization that does that. Because the assumption is that professional skills are soft skills and somehow you just magically pick those up. Okay, which is 100% baloney. So the first thing I recommend is that you think about the job that you've taken and the professional skills that you will need to do the job successfully. So I'm talking about things like communication. How do you get your point across? Okay, think about that clearly. Okay, there isn't a one size fit all of professional skills, but what we're going to talk today about is some generic professional skills that I think are applicable to every workplace. Okay, so every workplace should have these, but some workplaces need additional skills. The first one is you need to be able to communicate. And everybody communicates differently. And a lot of times how we communicate stems from early childhood socialization, family socialization, school socialization when you were young. Okay, so think about that. So how do you get your point across? So some people take the long way around and talk a lot about something, and it kind of goes round and round and round, and then maybe eventually, boom, they'll get to their point. Okay, some people are more like me. I'm direct, concise, to the point. Okay, very few people are like my style of communication. Okay, so those are just a couple of ways people communicate. So figure out how you communicate and how is that going to work in your organization that you've been hired in. So for example, let's say that you do sort of take the long way around to get to your point and you're working in customer service. Okay, that might be okay behind the scenes. That may not work as well when you're working with the customer who wants their problem solved and they want your help and they want to move on. Okay, so just because you communicate one way doesn't mean you can't adapt that skill for the workplace. But think about how you communicate and think about what your organization will need. One of the things I recommend is when you're going into your workplace is you experiment a little bit with how you think you communicate and how people are taking that form of communication. Okay, so for example, I'm very direct, concise, and to the point. That's off-putting for a lot of people. Okay, so it doesn't always work for me in the workplace. And so sometimes I've had to make a short statement longer, put some fluff in there, beat around the bush a little bit to make sure that I'm being heard. Okay, so what's your communication style? Where did it come from? And is that going to work in the workplace? The second one is conflict resolution. Most people that I have worked with and talked to say, oh, I don't mind conflict. But when it comes to push and shove, 99.9% of the people blow at conflict resolution is because we get uptight. It makes us upset. And then we don't know what we're supposed to be doing. That's okay. It happens. Okay. So how do you resolve conflict? Okay. Again, my way of conflict is direct, to the point. Let's work it out and resolve it. Now, it doesn't mean that when there's an issue between myself and another coworker that I'm jumping on the bandwagon to solve it immediately. Okay. Sometimes what I do when it comes to conflict resolution is I wait for the appropriate and the best moment. Okay, I'm not letting stuff stir and build up. What I'm doing is thinking about how I'm going to resolve that and finding the best moment to do that. So sometimes when I'm upset, if something has triggered me at work, okay, I'm not going to go in and resolve that because that's not a good time for me. When I resolve conflict, I make sure that I'm calm. I always carry in some paper with notes written down clearly what I want to say. Because when I get into a conflict situation, just like everybody else, sometimes my emotions get going. And I want to stick to the point and I want to get it resolved. The other thing that I do when I'm in conflict is I always have a mechanism to get out if it goes haywire. Okay. So, how do you resolve conflict? Do you avoid it? Are you a head on? Okay. Do you, again, want to resolve conflict in the long way around? Figure out how you resolve conflict and then figure out what's the best way to resolve conflict in your workplace. Okay. Again, remember that when you're in the workplace, you don't have to solve everything immediately. Okay. You're the new person coming in. And again, what I recommend is instead of going into the workplace, especially if you're coming into a leadership position and going in and bulldozing everything over, take time to get to see and look around and see what people are doing. Okay. If you're coming in a leadership position and you're bringing about change immediately, people don't like that. I've made that mistake before. Kind of, I know the right way and bulldoze, bulldoze, bulldoze. And what that ends up doing oftentimes is alienating those people who are there. So, this is good advice for both leaders and just workers coming in. Take time to check out the scenery and what people are doing and how people are interacting and resolving conflict and communicating. Okay. Don't trust too quickly in the workplace. Trust should be earned, not given. Okay. And that's the same for you. Earn people's trust. Don't expect them to trust you immediately. Okay. And so when you trust people too quickly, especially if there's toxicity and bullying, what ends up happening is you might get hurt. You might be pulled into the bullying and or be a target of bullying because you've said something, you've trusted someone. There's nothing wrong with entering the workplace with caution. So check out your communication skills. Check out your conflict resolution skills. Don't go in and trust too quickly. Again, remember, trust is earned. Okay. And especially if there's bullying and toxicity, you have to be very cautious about who you trust and what you say. The other thing I think is really good in any workplace are these last two skills we're going to talk about. One is active listening, and two is empathy. Okay, so active listening is listening actively, meaning that you're hearing what people are saying. Okay, and that's hard work. Okay, because you might be a lot like me. I'm a lot of times in my own head doing my own thing, and I don't want to necessarily sit down and hear what people are saying to me. But take the time to learn how to actively listening. And what you can do is you can repeat back the exact same things again, for a lack of a better term. You can regurgitate what the person has said to you to ensure that you've heard what they've said. Okay. You can, I hear ya, right? Again, to display that you're listening to what they say. The best thing about active listening is that you're hearing what that person is saying. And the best way to make sure you've done that is to repeat back or reframe what they've said. And if you have heard something differently than what they have said, the words coming out of their mouth, then allow them the time to repeat it and re-say it. Okay. And why it's so important that we actively listen and hear what people are saying in the workplace is because it adds to everything else. When we know where someone is coming from, it helps us communicate better. It helps us resolve conflict. It just makes the foundation of our workplace so much better. The other thing we need to have is empathy. We have to hear what people are saying, but we have to understand where people are coming from. So, empathy is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and feel like and understand something from their perspective. So, if you're going to have empathy for me, imagine yourself putting yourself in my shoes, looking through the world through my set of progressive lenses. You see it how I see it, meaning you can feel and understand, feel compassionate for where I'm coming from and what I'm saying. Okay. And why that's so important in the workplace is when we can have empathy for other people, it builds our relationships and it makes our team stronger. And I'm going to add one more thing to my list of skills that are generic that I think you are really important for the workplace. And one of them is, and the last one is self reflection. And self reflection goes hand in hand with active listening and empathy. Because self reflection is being able to see how your behavior and your professional skills or who you are in the workplace is influencing other people. Okay. So, how I come across in the workplace and how other people see me come across in the workplace matters, because sometimes how I see myself through my lens is not accurate. And when I have empathy and active listening, what I can do is I can hear and understand how other people see and feel my behavior. Okay. And as a result of that, self reflection allows me to adapt and change my behavior to be better in the workplace. So here's an example from my personal life. So my youngest son, Ethan, let's be honest, didn't meet the same cleanliness standards that I had when he was living at home. Okay. And when I would go into his room and he literally had Mountain Dew cans stacked around his TV, it lit my fuse. Okay. And I wanted it cleaned up because Mountain Dew is sticky, it's gross. You know the reason I wanted it cleaned up. And I tend to be kind of a loud talker. He is interpreted that as yelling. So for a long time, I'd come into his room, I'd quote unquote loud talk. He'd see it as yelling, and we never got anywhere. And he said to me, when you yell, I shut down because I don't like people yelling at me. And I viewed myself as not being a yeller, but a loud talker. Okay. So eventually the light bulb went on in my head, and I said, I have two choices. I can hear what he's saying. And what he's saying to me is, it's not that he's not going to clean up the Mountain Dew cans. It's that he doesn't like the way I'm approaching him when I want him to pick up the Mountain Dew cans. So I could keep doing what I was doing, being stubborn and quote unquote loud talking. He sees it as yelling. The Mountain Dew cans are still there. Or I can change how I approach him in a quieter, softer tone, respecting him more, asking him to do things. And guess what? Boom, he stopped having Mountain Dew cans all over, and he started picking those up when I changed my behavior, because how I saw myself as a loud talker was different than how he saw me as yelling. And when I started to loud talk, he saw me as yelling. He wasn't going to pick the Mountain Dew cans up. When I changed my approach, yes, there were often times where he had a lot of Mountain Dew cans stacked around his computer or TV. But when I asked him in a gentler tone of voice, he would pick those up. And that's oftentimes how we are in the workplace, is we see ourselves one way, other people see ourselves another way. Here's another example. I was speaking a few years ago, and somebody came up to me and he said, I have allegations of workplace bullying. His background was military. He was now working in social services. And I said, well, tell me about how you present yourself and how you communicate with your employees. And he said, well, I do it like I learned in the military. Short, straight, confronting, to the point, kind of in your face sort of things. And I said, well, can you see how that might appear as bullying to your coworkers? And he mulled on it and thought about it. And I said to him, and what would happen, do you think, if you changed your approach from a military approach to a different approach that might be viewed by your employees as different? And it was almost like he had never thought about changing his own behavior and how he communicated in the workplace, because we just don't talk about and teach those skills. Okay. So it's really important. So it's a good idea, no matter if you're going into bully culture or toxicity, or you're not even aware of what the organizational culture is like, to go and prepare yourself with the skills, the professional skills that you think you will need. Okay. And remember that your professional skills are always going to be improving, and you're going to be changing as your team or your workplace changes. You don't just learn professional skills and then suddenly you don't have to learn anything. Developing your professional skills is an ongoing process. It's lifelong learning. So go prepare yourself the best possible way that you can, with the best skills possible, to make you the best worker you possibly can be in the workplace. Again, remember, when you're going into the workplace, especially if you think there's toxicity, but even if you're not sure, approach trusting people with caution. Sit back and watch how people are interacting, how they're communicating. Look for tension and conflict. See how people are supporting one another or not supporting one another. See if everyone is interacting. The other thing I think is really important is their laughter. What are the connections that people have? When you go into the workplace, it's very easy to pick out the things about people you don't like. We have a tendency to do that, to say, oh, this person is like that. I don't like that. That's off putting to me. Okay. Try to let those things go. And instead of alienating other people or yourself because they might be different than who you are, try to find the connections that you have. Because what's good about our workplaces is that it's a place for us to build connections. And I don't care what kind of workplace you are in, there are always means that we can connect with one another. I had a student once say to me, I'm white, and this student was black. And we were talking, again, I taught social work. We were talking about how we can build connections. And he said to me, well, I don't think we have very many things in common. And I said, well, I bet we have more things in common than we are different. And he said, I don't think so. And I said, is it because I'm white and you're black that you think we're not the same, or that we have a lot of differences? And he said, yes. And so we started making lists of things that we had in common. For example, we both like our families and we both support our families. We both love our families. We both have friends. We love our friends. We like to laugh. We enjoy music. We had similar food tastes. And the list went on and on and on. There were more things that we had in common than we did differences. And we can use those connections to make our relationships at work stronger, okay? Rather than to think his skin was black and mine is white and so we're different. Yes, our skin colors were different. Okay, but we had a lot of great connections. And for him, he couldn't believe how many things in common we had. Because oftentimes what we see about people, how they act, that separates us. So what I'm going to really recommend is that you try to go into that workplace, be cautious about building trust, let people earn that trust, but try to build connections and find what you have in common with people. Be empathetic. Listen to what people are saying. Reflect on how you might be coming across. Check your conflict resolution. How are you doing? What's your communication like? What areas can you improve on? Okay. And if you go in with the attitude that, again, the only thing you can control in the workplace is you, Okay, even if you're walking into bully culture, what you can do is you can make yourself the best professional skills, and whatever abilities you need to do your job, you can control those things and make connections with people. Be the best you can possibly be. And we'll talk about next week again, what can you do if you start to see tensions and conflict and bullying arise? Because these things that we talked about today, we're going to keep coming back to them about what you can control and how you can be a better worker in the workplace, because you're going to use those skills if you have to mitigate workplace bullying. Again, thank you so much for being here. Please like, subscribe, and share with anyone that you know who might be entering into a new job, especially one that might be entering into bully culture. And again, if there's anything I can do for you, you can leave a comment below or email me at jan@stopbullyculture.com.